You're watching Byline Wilmington on CBS 10 WILM. Here's your host, Don Ansell.
New Hanover County, Pender County District Attorney Ben David is our guest. We're talking about some serious charges against the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, the SBI, and the State Crime Lab. In 2004, former SBI Director Jim Coleman said in sworn testimony that the State Attorney General's office had a policy of withholding a certain type of evidence helpful to defendants. Later, he said that was incorrect, but he did say that under oath.
Well, and again, what evidence are we talking about being withheld? Are we talking about a confirmatory test that later proved to be not needed for the final result, like they were testifying in these serology cases? For instance, and just very briefly, sometimes you can look at a woman and say she's pregnant. Other times, you have to do a chemical test. That visual test might not be included in their ultimate opinion when their opinion is based on the scientific test. What I believe he was saying, and we'd have to ask Mr. Coleman, is all the steps in the process weren't being disclosed to defense attorneys and to prosecutors because there was no open file discovery law back then. It is required now. It's obviously wrong to withhold any evidence, and we shouldn't be the ones to decide what's material and what's not for Brady purposes, that is, what is exculpatory evidence. I say give it all to them.
Yeah.
And we've advocated putting it all online and at the earliest stages for defense attorneys and prosecutors to have, and I know that the SBI has recently done that even before this audit.
Do you think some overzealous prosecutors might have a tendency to ignore evidence that could be harmful to their case?
It's absolutely possible that that would occur in a case, and if it has occurred, we need to take a hard look at it. I am not aware, Don, of any single case where a prosecutor has desired a certain outcome and twisted evidence or asked people to change testimony. If we were aware of that, we should prosecute it.
Do you support the death penalty?
Yes.
You do?
I've put 3 men on death row. I support it because it's the law. If you ask me what the law should be, I'd say that's the job of the legislature. The ultimate punishment in North Carolina is the death penalty, and in the cases that are...
Would you support a moratorium on that?
I would not support a moratorium based upon this SBI audit.
Would you support a moratorium?
No.
No. I had, as you know, did talk radio for years. I interviewed Alan Gell, who was sentenced to death following a murder conviction. You're very familiar with the case.
Yes.
He was acquitted in a second trial after a judge ruled that prosecutors withheld key evidence with the help from an SBI agent who ignored ample was the word they used, evidence that the defendant was innocent. Is that not an example of an overzealous prosecutor?
And the special prosecution unit that you've been referring to actually handled that case on the retrial. Let me say this about the moratorium and that whole issue, because there's some good folks that have disagreements about the death penalty. The pendulum is switching from let's vote an up or down on whether the death penalty should be the law. Because if it should be the law, let's enforce it. Right now, it's the law, but no one's getting executed. You say, do I support a moratorium? Don, we haven't had an execution in North Carolina in over 2 years.
But you believe in law.
I believe in enforcing the law.
It is now the law, and would you support changing that to let's go on hold?
We need to make sure that the questions that have been raised are answered, and I believe that that should be done, and I think it should be done through this top-down review of the lab. And of course, Don, if there's any case implicated where someone on death row has any suggestion that some of the evidence might have been withheld or manipulated, that individual case should be thoroughly reviewed, and there should be a per se moratorium on that case. But if you have someone who is guilty of raping and torturing and murdering a child, for instance, and it's on videotape, there's DNA, he's confessed, and there's 10 witnesses, if you say that he shouldn't be executed, you're not talking about a moratorium now. You're talking about the fact that you're against the death penalty, and there's a difference. What you're saying is, let's either enforce the law or not. I'm saying, if it's on the books, let's enforce it. If you disagree with the law, go through the legislative process. I'm in the court system. I say, let's enforce the laws on the books. We're using a lot of these cases.
So do you think we should move forward with executions?
For clearly guilty people that have been found guilty by juries, if that is the law, yes.
Well, clearly guilty. If someone is found guilty by a jury, it's clearly guilty, but it could be wrong.
Well, you're talking about the finality now within the justice system. If there is someone where there's no claim of actual innocence, for instance, they've fully confessed, there's nuclear DNA, there's videotape maybe of him doing the case. If you have all of those things and it's a jury's verdict, if you're not willing to carry out the death penalty in that case, Don, you're just against the death penalty. I'm saying that's the law that's on the books. We either need to start enforcing the law or be honest with the people that put us in offices, whether we're legislators or prosecutors or judges, and say we are not going to enforce this law.
We're just about out of time, but you've put forth a proposal to create a crime lab that would serve this district.
That's right.
Tell us a little about
Months
that
ago,
quickly.
we convened a Blue Ribbon Commission to look at whether we could, for the 5th District and for the surrounding counties, create a regional crime lab. The idea there being that we would cut down a lot of time having to go back and forth to Raleigh in an investigative way, see stuff at an earlier stage, get the fingerprints off the window and know who did the B&E earlier, get the rape case done and know who the guy was on the loose at a much earlier
Would you have
stage.
tighter control over how it operates?
Well, when you say tighter control...
Who would run that pilot?
Well, that depends. I'm excited to look at what comes out of this report because there's going to be an issue as to how independent you want your lab to be. We certainly want it independent enough where we can avoid even the suggestion that it's being manipulated by people within the court system.
Would it be under the state or would it be under the district?
It would be under, well, again, there's local police agencies like Mecklenburg that have their own labs. Wilmington PD currently does. We're trying to expand that. We have taken cases out of local labs and put them in the SBI precisely to avoid the suggestions that we're hearing about right now, which is that you're too close to it. There's a case in Charlotte, for instance, where 2 officers were just murdered, and a lot of their lab work was done by the same agency where they worked. And the suggestion by the defense attorney is, these folks can't be fair, it was one of their family members who was killed. If I had a case like that, I would move to try and make it as independent as possible to head off that suggestion. So I think with a local lab, we're going to make sure that it's independent in operation, but we work closely enough with it to aid in investigations at early stages.
We'll follow that story and hopefully have you back.
I'll come back anytime you invite me, Don.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Ben David, District Attorney for New Hanover-Pender County, is our guest this morning. Join us next week, an interesting show. Her book is a bestseller. It's an Oprah Winfrey pick. It's about being fat. It's called Designated Fat Girl. She'll be our guest, Jennifer Joyner, next week. Be sure to join us at our new time, 8:30 for Byline Wilmington. I'm Don Ansell. Have a great week.
You've been watching Byline Wilmington on CBS 10 WILM. Join us every Sunday morning as we explore the issues that concern you.